You're listening to Arin It Out, a podcast that inspires everyday people to lead with purpose in their careers, communities, and callings. I'm Arin Patterson, TEDx speaker, leadership strategist, and culture architect. I'm passionate about helping people discover their strengths, develop their skills, and do meaningful and fulfilling work. Through honest conversations and real reflections, we'll explore what it truly takes to lead well, not just in the work that you do, but in who you become. Because it's not about the title you wear, it's about the stretch, the setbacks, and the silent wins along the way. Are you ready to grow, lead, and leave your mark? If so, let's begin. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Arin It Out. Today's topic in episode 4 is It's the Manager. Now last week we talked about raggedy leadership and how that affects employees, teams, and organizations, but today we're going to focus in on the manager being the source of really success in any role that you have. Today we're going to be using a resource entitled It's the Manager, which is a book that I've had for a couple of years now, and it was produced by Gallup. So for anyone who is familiar with Gallup and or CliftonStrengths, they do a lot of research in the workplace. And so we're going to start by going through CliftonStrengths and how that impacts organizations, and then we'll flow into one of the chapters of the book concerning the right expectations as it relates to managers. I'm curious as to how many of you all are familiar with CliftonStrengths, and I was tempted to say, raise your hand if you've heard of CliftonStrengths before, but obviously I can't see you guys right now. But CliftonStrengths was developed by Gallup. It's formerly known as Strengths Finders, and it identifies your top talents, these natural patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So instead of focusing on your weaknesses, the philosophy is that you develop what people already do best and you manage around it. So if you've never heard of CliftonStrengths, essentially it was founded in positive psychology, which learns to focus on the best of people, what's right with people and not what's wrong with people. And Gallup's research, it shows that people who use their strengths are 6 times more likely to engage at work and 3 times more likely to report having an excellent quality of life. Why is that? Because when you focus on what's positive, you give room for that to expand. When you focus on what's negative, you give room for that to expand. So for people who focus in on CliftonStrengths and your strengths in general, you have more comfort around just the positive things that you do well. Now, managers play a huge role in if employees get to use their strengths at work. Gallup found that 1/3 of employees strongly agree that their manager focuses on what they do best. 1/3. 1/3. 33% of people say that their managers focus in on what they do best. And when managers fail to do this, fail to focus in on, wow, this employee is good at building relationships. This employee is good at creating systems. When managers do not do that, employees tend to disengage. And one of the things that we want for myself as someone who is a leader and someone who cares about organizations and their growth and development, we want employees engaged at work. I know for myself as an employee, I want to be engaged at work. I don't want to go to work every single day and be bored out of my mind or feel like I cannot do what I'm actually good at. So learning to tap into your strengths is a huge piece of this. So today I want to start by sharing my top 5 strengths with you and allow you to see how that shows up in my work. So my very first strength is futuristic, which essentially means I'm a visionary. I'm always looking forward. I have this ability to create what does not yet exist in my mind. And it's been very beneficial for the work that I do currently. But I've just seen it be something that's helped me over the course of my career, and not just in W-2 roles, but also in the different entrepreneurial endeavors I've gone into. Being futuristic is something that I really lean into on an everyday basis. I'm constantly creating plans and systems to help me lean into that, to say, okay, this doesn't exist right now in my life, in my work. What plans and what things can I do to create this so that it does exist in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months? My second strength is connectedness. Now, connectedness simply means that I see how all things are connected. There's a link between all events that happens. So when I think about different jobs that I've had, when I think about different experiences that I had, I understand that they work together for a greater purpose. And that's something I just naturally think about all the time. Like, wow, if this certain thing didn't happen back then I wouldn't have gone to apply for this job. And then I wouldn't have had this experience, which helped me to learn and grow in this area. I'm constantly thinking about that. My third strength is maximizer. So if you've ever heard of the book From Good to Great, that is essentially what maximizers do. We look at things that are really good and we say, how can we make this even better? We don't really take the time to look at things that are in shambles, if you will. We look at the things that are already doing pretty good and sustainable and say, how can we take this to the next level? And so that is something I think about with systems, but I also think about with people. When I think about people that I lead, I actually had one employee at my previous job. She was really great at building relationships, really great at building relationships, so natural, walk up to people and could talk to literally anyone. And so I'm always thinking like, wow, what can we do to get her in front of more people, to get her to engage with more people because she's already so great at it. So what are the avenues and the possibilities where she can use this strength even more? My fourth strength is relates to deal with my desire to build deep, meaningful relationships. When it comes to the workplace, I'm someone who I enjoy having a lot of one-on-one conversations, small group conversations, because I really want to get to know people. I really want to understand who is this person that I'm working with? Who is this person that I have the privilege of sitting in front of? And I really value learning people's stories. And so Relator is how that shows up for me. My fifth strength is positivity. So positivity, anyone who knows me, I'm very optimistic naturally. I bring a lot of energy to the work that I do. And I want to, walk in a space and people be like, wow, Aaron's here. And not like in a arrogant kind of way, but in a way like we're going to have a good time, everything's going to be okay. That is kind of my mindset when I walk in. And every single morning when I walk into my office, I'm saying good morning, walking down the hall. I just love bringing that energy to the work that I do. And I encourage you, if you have never taken the Clifton Strengths assessment, I say that you should take it. And the reason is because it helps you to really frame who you are and what you're good at. I know when I took this back in, honestly, not that long ago, it was 2019. I took the assessment in 2019. I was working for a university back in Florida. And I remember being so glad that I took it because it helped me to better frame things I knew I was good at, but helped me to really understand, okay, what does that look like in a work setting? How can I use this going forward in my career? And it really helped me to map out something. It really helped me to clarify the direction that I wanted my career to go. And Clifton Strengths has truly shaped how I view myself as an individual and also how I view myself as a leader. But Gallup, they didn't stop with just individuals. They've studied what employees need from managers. So today, our primary focus is going to come from chapter 17 of Gallup's book, It's the Manager. Now, I mentioned if you have not taken Clifton Strengths, that I highly suggest that you do so. You can simply get a code by buying one of these books on Amazon, a Gallup book, a Clifton Strengths book, and take the assessment that. Chapter 17 is called The Right Expectations. So, as it relates to a manager and as it relates to you as an employee, it is important that you have these right expectations. And then in parentheses, it simply says competencies 2.0. So, these are things that managers, individuals, that leaders should be doing in the workplace. So, the very first thing is my probably absolute favorite thing to do in the workplace is this: build relationships. Great managers intentionally build trust and connections. Now, one thing that I always say in the workplace is that it's very hard to work with people that you do not know. And a lot of times when I first meet people, when I first start interacting with them in a work setting, I really try to learn a lot about them. I try to learn their children's name, their spouse's name, what they enjoy doing, different things that make them excited or things that frustrate them, and not just in the context of work, but also appropriate things about them outside of work. So, understanding people who like to travel and, why you like to travel and what do you like to do when you travel, just different things that help you to understand a little bit more about how people's brains work. And without building good relationships, people will not follow you. Um, People may want to follow you, see that you're successful, but if you're not building intentional relationships with employees, with the people that you work with, it will be very hard for people to follow you very far or very. And when I think about this, I think a huge reason, not only just who I am innately, but I also feel like I haven't really worked with that many people who were huge on relationships as far as like direct supervisors. And so I feel like in a lot of ways I've been the person to come in to support the work. So I have leaders who may be great in one area and I find myself really great in this area. And I want to support the work of the people that I'm reporting to, and you know I see my relationship building ability as something that can do that in organizations. And I'm someone who has mostly worked in mission driven organizations, so educational environments, um, nonprofit environments. And so relationship building, I would say, is the foundation of all organizations, or should be the foundation, but specifically in mission driven organizations, relationships matter so much. And the second thing is this: great leaders develop people. It is so important for you as a leader to find yourself coaching your employees, mentoring employees, creating opportunities for them to grow and for them to develop. People don't want to just work with you. People want to grow. People want to develop. People want to know that when opportunities come up the road, that they will be in a position to accept them. And us as leaders, it is necessary for us to have the right conversations with employees to help facilitate that development. You know, I think one thing, and age doesn't have anything to do with this. I think it deals more with experience. And anytime I have an employee who I see wants to grow in the direction that my career is either going, or a direction that my career has gone previously, I try to open up as many opportunities for them. And a lot of times that's just bringing them on with your day to day. A lot of times it's just letting them know, hey, this meeting is happening and here's why this is happening. Here's some insight for you to know. Here's something that will help you as you grow. And feel free to ask me questions. Feel free to let's have a conversation or sit down about this. And not just having conversations, but I mentioned this in a previous episode. One reason I left a company before was because there was no opportunities for professional development. And I said, this is wild to me. I want to be here because I want to grow. I want to go beyond where I currently am, and I need opportunities to develop. And I think sometimes, in the climate that we live, depending on what kind of organization you're in, you have to get creative, because there won't always be those formal professional development opportunities where you fly somewhere for a week, stay for a week, sit in sessions all day long. But what are some ways that you can develop yourself apart from the traditional conference for a week kind of setting? But I believe that it's necessary for us as leaders to find ways and find avenues to support the growth and development of our employees. And I'll also say this: yes, it is necessary and beneficial when you have a leader who champions your growth. But one thing that you have to do as you grow through your career is understand how to be the champion for your own growth, for your own development. I recently had a conversation with my manager and I said to her, I see how you excel in this specific area, and is this something that you learned from a book? Is this something you learned from a person? Do you just have this information because of your years of experience? And we kind of sat through and talked through that. And she asked, like, is there something specific you're looking to gain through getting this extra information? I said, I just see myself as really good in the area of relationships and a couple of other things that I mentioned. And I said, I feel like I am lacking, honestly, in this other area. And it's not so much about lacking, it's just I'm constantly growing. And so I said, I see opportunity for growth. I see opportunity for development. And just really asking her, what tools and resources do you suggest so I can grow in this way? And we had a really great conversation. She shared some things with me that she felt like would be beneficial for me. And, at the end of the day, a lot of the reason she feels like she is proficient in that area is simply because she has worked in the field for so long. And part of that sounds maybe discouraging, because you're like, man, I got to stay around for X amount of years to get this level of information. Um, but growth and development is not an overnight thing. It's not something that you wake up one morning after one conference, one session, and now you have all the tools that you need. And so I encourage you to not only ask your current manager, current supervisor for assistance in the development of yourself and leaders for you to seek out ways to develop your employees, but as individuals, I need for you guys to champion your own growth and your own development. The third thing is this: great leaders and great managers know how to lead change. One thing that is inevitable in our lives is change. And great leaders, great managers navigate it with clarity as well as confidence and know how to communicate it. You know, I work in higher education, and I don't ever watch snooze, quite frankly. But I do know there's a lot of things that are changing in the landscape of higher education. And I don't think that just applies to my current industry. I think for many industries that you all work in, that you will see that things are constantly changing. And it is up to us as leaders, because if you're listening to Airing It Out, you are a leader, but it's up to us as leaders to make sure we are clearly communicating this with confidence, that people need to understand what is happening. We can't just allow things to happen and not have conversations about the things that are coming up. We have to be okay saying, here's what's going on. Here's what I can say about this, and here's how this impacts us as an organization going forward. Now, I understand that leaders find themselves in positions where sometimes you are concerned about how to say a specific thing, but that's where, let me just throw in, AI is good for you. You can say to AI, like, hey, I need to communicate X, Y, and Z to my team. What are some ways I can do this without oversharing or saying something I might later regret? And begin to practice the skill of speaking in front of people, because change is not so much, I think many of us understand that change is going to happen. I think the hard part about change is not understanding or not having some backstory of why this is happening and the direction that it's going. So it is necessary for us to lead change well. And I think a lot of that happens through communication. Now, poor leaders and poor managers tend to resist change and or conversations about it. They try to just allow the change to happen. They say it's going to happen, so just let it happen without honestly caring for people. And next season, I'm excited. I have a guest that's coming on, and we're going to have a whole conversation about change in the workplace and what that looks like for organizations as well as individuals. But it is necessary for us as leaders to navigate change with care. And here's the fourth thing that great leaders and great managers do: they inspire others. Now, you all have heard me say before that I am a huge fan of transformational leadership. That is one of the core components of transformational leadership, is knowing how to inspire others. And inspiration is not simply about motivation. I think motivation is a huge piece of that in helping people to get to the next place. But inspiring individuals really comes from a baseline of understanding, what do these employees and what does this organization need, and being able to speak vision to that, being able to communicate, here's the direction that I see you going, here's the direction I see the team going, and really kind of championing that vision. And I'll say here's partly where my futuristic come out, as well as my positivity, and me saying, here's what I see for you, here's a bit of optimism for you, because I see that you have this skill that is really great, and I see the need for it to be developed over time. And so really helping people to understand that what they do matters, and really communicating that well. One thing I do understand for myself and for people that I lead is a lot of people want to know that what they do matters, and in terms of their purpose, in terms of, I'm not just doing tasks, I'm not just checking things off of a list, but what I am doing is speaking to or contributing to a larger purpose at hand. And the research shows this: Gallup says engaged employees are 125% more productive when they feel inspired. Now, that sounds so wild to me, that simply learning to inspire and speak well to your people can produce that kind of a jump in productivity. But that just speaks to inspiration and inspiring the people that you lead. It matters. Helping them to see the vision. What are we working towards? And communicating that will help your team succeed. The fifth thing that great leaders or great managers do is think critically. Think critically. It is necessary to practice good judgment, good decision making, weighing the facts, challenging assumptions, learning to not react on impulse. All of these things show great critical thinking skills. And you may find yourself in a position where either you yourself are not fully confident in your critical thinking capacity or ability, and or see a leader who you do not feel like is thinking critically. I think it's necessary for us to help facilitate the people around us in growing in their critical thinking skills, asking questions that get at the deeper issue, the deeper problem, or really the root of what's happening, so that people can get out of their little small bubble. Because sometimes we're in a place at work where we're so zoomed in on what we're doing that we're not able to really think critically about what that means for our team, what that means for our organization, what it means for those that we lead. And critical thinking is not something that you can forego in the workplace. And one way that I personally practice critical thinking is, I have a lot of, in my current role, I have a lot of task and communication that has to happen in a pretty quick amount of time. But I recognize that it's better for me to slow down to be accurate as opposed to speeding up with errors. And so a lot of times I will have an answer, I will have a response um, pretty quickly after a problem comes to me. But there are times where I have to allow myself to sit on an email or sit on some communication of some form, sit on uh, a conversation that I know I need to have with an employee. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for half of a day, sometimes for 2 days, because I recognize that how it comes across is going to kind of be a chain reaction. And so if I take the time and really think about what do I need to communicate, what do I need to say, what is the intended outcome, that's going to help me get to a better solution in the end, as opposed to just jumping ahead without really thinking through what needs to take place. Sixth thing, great leaders and great managers communicate clearly. This will be a reoccurring theme on this show. It will be a reoccurring theme because communication is the bedrock, the foundation of what's happening in the workplace. I've said this before. Brene Brown says that clear is kind, and lack of clarity leads to confusion, frustration, and quite frankly, wasted work time. And we don't want any of those things. I don't want you guys confused. I don't want you frustrated, and I don't want you wasting your time at work. Great managers create systems and cadences for communication. I actually had this conversation with my team recently, and uh actually I had this conversation at a department meeting with someone who is in a similar role to me within my department. And that one person said that they felt like they over communicated some things, and almost so much so that as communication was coming in, it wasn't being acknowledged because it was coming in so frequently. And I said, with this certain communication, I'm finding myself sending it out on a monthly basis. But I feel like between the two of us, we've got to get into a good in between, because I said I feel like my monthly communication may not be enough for some things. And I said your 2 to 3 times a week may be way too much. And how do we get to a place where we find the middle ground for communication? And I think that's something we're constantly learning. And I don't think it's a one size fits all model, because in my current role, there's certain communication needs that were not present for my previous role. And going forward to my next role, I know that the communication needs and desires may be different. And so it's learning to adjust, learning to understand. And at the end of the day, always do think it's better to over communicate than under communicate. So that's something that I'm always working through. Even as good of a communicator as I think I am, I know that there's always room for improvement. And the seventh and final expectation for a good manager or a good leader is that they create accountability. Employees need fair, consistent standards. Otherwise, trust erodes. How many times have you interacted with somebody and you're like, I just had that same conversation with my manager, and the outcome was a little bit different, and you couldn't understand why there were two different paths being taken for the same situation. And it is necessary for us as leaders to be accountable to those that we lead. One thing that I practice often is two things actually. is one, apologizing when I am wrong, when I'm like, man, I made a mistake on that, apologizing to my employees if I dropped the ball. But also just taking accountability to say, man, I should have done X, Y, and Z for this. That would have got to this outcome. Saying that would have got to a certain outcome that we needed. But you've got to, as an individual, be accountable for yourself. And leaders, it is necessary for us to be accountable to and for ourselves and to and for those that we lead. And as it relates to accountability, this is why it's necessary for us to put systems in place, so that we're not just kind of working on a whim. It's easy to one day be in a really good mood and treat an employee in a certain way. And then another day be in a bad mood and treat a different employee in a different way. And we cannot do that. As leaders, we have got to set very clear expectations for ourselves and for those that we lead. And to say, if this happens, here's what my response will be, and here's what I need for your response and follow up to be. Not for it to be something that's just haphazard and happens on a whim. And if it's a Tuesday, this is how you respond. If it's a Wednesday, this is how you respond. It's necessary for us to grow and to develop in consistency and how we interact with our employees. Still understanding that they're individuals, but at the end of the day, the outcomes, the what's happening on the end, the results should not be so different from one another just because it's one day to the next or one employee or another. So as you are navigating your journey through leadership and learning to be a better leader and not a raggedy one, these are the 7 competencies that you need to develop and practice consistently. You've got to be someone who builds relationships. You need to learn how to develop people. You have to understand how to lead change effectively. You need to learn how to inspire others. You've got to think critically. You need to communicate clearly. And you have to create accountability. None of these things happen overnight. These are things that you can develop, and I'm sure I could provide a resource for all of these different 7 things. But I would say we've got to start with where we are. And, if you notice an area of lack, if you notice an area that you're like, whoa, I'm way off base on this, I would challenge you to start with that today. So here's my question for you today. Which of these 7 expectations do you feel most confident in as a leader? Most confident, you feel like it's an area of strength. And which have you neglected or experienced poorly in a manager? Which have you personally neglected and which have you experienced poorly in a manager? I want you to think about that. Share your thoughts with me. Before we wrap up, I would love your help in growing the Arin It Out community. One thing that I have been so enjoying over the last few weeks is the amount of people that have sent me text messages, sent me messages, stopped me at work and at other places that I go in the community, and have simply just said, I am so enjoying your podcast. And that warms my heart so much, that you all are finding the content relatable. But I want for this community to grow. I want for more people having conversations about what it looks like to lead effectively in the workplace. And so, if this episode gave you something to think about, here are a few ways you can help me keep the conversation going. Number 1, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. Rate and review the show on Apple or Spotify. Reviews make a huge difference in helping the listeners discover these conversations. So click those 5 stars, leave a description also if you would like. Share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or even a manager if you think they'd benefit. If you have that kind of relationship with them. If you have a bad relationship with your manager, don't send this to them. We've all seen raggedy leadership, and sometimes we need a reminder of what good leadership looks like. Next week on Air It Out, we're diving into a concept that I've been sharing at conferences this year. It is something that I created, and I'm so thrilled to share it with you guys. It's entitled The Leadership Leak. It's all about small but costly ways leaders unintentionally drain engagement, trust, and motivation for their teams, and how to fix the leaks before they become full-blown problems. If you've ever felt like your team is losing steam and you can't figure out why, you don't want to miss it. I want to thank you again for joining me on this episode of Airing It Out. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time. Have a great day.